Senator Heidi Heitkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the ranking member for holding this hearing. And I want to thank the panel of experts. I think this is a critical issue, not because we worry so much about the Chinese economy, but we worry about the effect of the Chinese economy on the economy of the world and certainly the economy of the United States. And so over the past 12 months, I've watched market volatility rise and fall and being affected by speculation, one would argue, but certainly by concerns about what's happening in the Chinese economy. I asked the Assistant Secretary for International Finance, to Louis, to come into my office and talk about the Chinese banking system and from Treasury's perspective, what are the risks, where do we think we are right now, and what are we looking at? He did a great job, I think, kind of running through the paces on where we are right now, what the concerns are, and honestly saying, you know, this is a situation that needs to watch, but don't press the panic button yet. So I want to ask a couple questions about where we are right now in terms of our evaluation of the Chinese economy, of the potential credit bubble, and what that means for the American economy, and then also, you know, what we can't see. I mean, we see the institutional kind of structure that we're allowed to look at, but we've got the whole concern about what's happening with shadow banking and what's happening with what we can't see. And so I guess my first question would be for anyone on the panel, you know, the Chinese government has made commitments to be more transparent and to improve kind of their financial data and financial reporting. How many of you believe that China will actually follow through on those commitments, that will actually get better data as a result of that commitment? And then secondly, because I think I know your answer already, what are the secondary tools that we can, in fact, utilize that will give us better data and better insight on what's actually happening institutionally with Chinese lending? So I'd just start here with Mr. Shea and work down the road.
Well, you've heard about the credit bubble, close to 300% of GDP. Shadow banking is a concern. Transparency, greater transparency, that's something that the Chinese Communist Party is not really too keen on. So would not be optimistic on seeing tremendous amount of greater transparency. Let me just make a point that's been raised, if it's all right. It relates to your question. This Chai America thesis that the Chinese and the American economies are so interrelated that they're one and the same thing. It's not true. China is not America's banker. Please don't say that. I don't think I did. I know, but I mean, just I've heard.
In fact, I think if you had Treasury here, you would see, you would hear exactly that.
Because
this has been over-exaggerated in terms of the risk to the American economy, but it still needs to be watched. So my question is, you know, I think we all agree that we aren't going to get transparency. The question is, short of actually getting data that we can rely on from the Chinese government, where do we go to actually have a deeper and better understanding of what is happening with credit in China?
Anybody else?
That China's not transparent, you know, is very clear, that it's not just a question of the banking statistics, as has been mentioned before, in terms of their whole GDP numbers. All of this seems to be rather fictional. You know, I very much agree that China is not growing at 6.7%. It's rather growing at something like 4%. I would think that these problems are very deep-seated, that they're serving a Communist Party that is wanting to stay in power, that doesn't really have an interest in transparency. And the problem might be is that they've got control over the banking system in a way other countries really don't.
I think we all understand. I don't know if I'm just being too opaque here, but like the Chinese. But what I'm trying to get at is we don't believe, and I don't believe, that we will get reliable data from the government, and the government right now is a source of information. What are the other sources of information that we can utilize to better evaluate? I mean, you know, you're speculating on what the actual gross domestic product is of China. Why should we rely on your 4? Why shouldn't we believe it's potentially 2 or 1.5?
Right. Well, if one has to do this privately and one has to do this indirectly, you're going to have a range of estimates. So basically what people are doing is they're trying to figure this out from various indicators. Instead of looking at GDP as it should properly be put together, what they're doing is they're looking at electricity consumption, credit expansion, tourist traffic,
Sure.
rail freight, and so on, and trying to build it up from the ground. But you're really only going to get indications that the official numbers are
Doctor,
very
do you think
problem-
that's complicated by shadow banking, we don't really know what the complete credit picture is, because we don't know. Historically, I would imagine there's been a lot of shadow banking. That's been traditional methods of funding capital or moving capital that could be below the radar even for the government. And so the question is, how much risk do you think we have in shadow banking?
Oh, certainly in China, there is considerable risk. We know that the shadow banks have been very active in extending credit, and this would be a problem in a country that wasn't run by the Communist Party, to have shadow
Right.
banks.
Well, we
often-
have shadow banking.
Correct. If that's not properly regulated, you can really run into difficulties on that score. That is a source of concern. But as I've
Do you agree with Mr. Shea that we have over-exaggerated, probably in the media more than any place, the interconnectivity between the American economy and the risk to the American economy from Chinese bubbles?
The risk might be there, but what I would just note is that last year, what occurred is because of capital flight out of China, China reduced its treasury holdings by a fair amount. It reduced its international reserves from something like $4 trillion to $3 trillion. There was a decline in $1 trillion in their international reserve holdings, and the world didn't come to an end.
Right.
The notion that they can really disrupt our markets, would seem to have been tested last year.
Yeah, I'm out of time, and so I probably submit some questions for the record, but just wanted to make sure that we got the point.
Brookings Institution has done some work on Chinese shadow banking, and the work I've read indicates that they don't think it's that big a concern in China. So we can send that, we can get that for you.